Today we are going to be talking about the farm and the pond. My name is Farmer Kelly and I'm going to be helping you out through this tour. Today we're going to talk about the farm animals and pond animals. All of these animals, no matter what, they need food, water, space, and shelter. Okay? They need all of those things in order to survive. Now, some of these animals have to find these things on their own. They need to find their own food, water, space, and shelter. And those animals are wild animals. Domestic animals are animals that are like pets, where we give them their food, water, space, and shelter. All of these animals, even though they need those four things, they all look a little bit different, and they all have different things to tell them apart. So we are going to practice on my pet cat here. My pet cat, we like to cuddle together.
Miss, I don't think that's a cat.
Wait, why? How do you know it's not a cat?
Well, it doesn't look like a cat.
Well, what does a cat look like?
Well, it has like fur and stuff.
Ah, good catch. So this, it's not a cat. We know that it is a duck by looking at what is special to the duck and how we tell it apart. We look at the animal's skin. So a duck has feathers, where a cat has fur or hair. We look at an animal's feet. So we see here a duck has webbed feet to help push it through the water so that it can swim nice and fast. A cat, it has paws. We can also look at how many feet the animal has. Our duck has 2 feet, whereas a cat has 4. We can also look at the animal's mouth and how they eat their food. So a duck has something special called a bill, and that bill helps them eat their water or eat their food in the water. Then we have a cat who has teeth, and that's how they chew their food. So this is how we tell all of these different animals apart, by looking at all of these different pieces. The last thing that you can look at is how an animal gets around. We have a duck that it walks, it swims, and it flies. Anybody have a flying cat at home? No, I don't think so. Cats get around by running and walking. So we're going to talk about the things that you might be able to find on a farm and on a pond. So we've got our farm animals. You can find chickens on the farm. And you can find ducks on the farm. You can find ducks in the wild, and you can find domestic ducks. You can find pigs on the farm. You can find cattle on the farm. Sometimes you can find turkeys on a farm, and you can see turkeys in the wild as well as on the farm. We've got sheep on the farm. And sometimes what you'll see on the farm is you'll see fencing and things to protect our domestic animals, our pet animals, from wild animals. So we're going to put the raccoon up here in the corner. Then, of course, we have Farmer Kelly. We've got Farmer Kelly on the farm. And last, but certainly not least, we have Farmer Larry. Farmer Larry is a very important part to the farm, where he looks after feeding the animals, giving them water, making sure that their pens are all cleaned up, and also farming all the food. So whenever you see a farmer, boys and girls, I want you to wave and say hi and thank you. There's Farmer Larry. At the pond, there's lots of different things that you can find at the pond. We've got spiders, okay? We have side swimmers, and these guys, they're my absolute favorite. They look like little shrimp, and they swim around on their side. We've got the side swimmers there. We have mayfly nymphs, and dragonfly nymphs. When you hear the word nymph, that means that it is a baby of something. So when these guys are done growing and swimming around in the pond, they're going to grow up to be a dragonfly and a mayfly. We've got caddisflies flying around out there. We've got some back swimmers and water boatmen. We've got there's sometimes mosquito pupae in the pond because that's where they like to grow before they become flying around mosquitoes. We've also got pond skaters that like to spend their time on the top of the water. We've got tadpoles that we know grow into frogs. There's giant water bugs and snapping turtles. Now the last very important piece to our pond is that it is a beaver pond. So we have a beaver that lives in our pond and it helps build up our dam so that it's nice and tall and so that the pond is really big and healthy. So those are all the kinds of things that you can be finding at the farm and the pond.
As Farmer Kelly shared, all of those animals that she talked about can actually be divided into 6 categories. And the way that we look at those, making those 6 categories is 3 different things. We're going to look at if they're warm-blooded or cold-blooded. We're going to look at their skin, and we're going to look at how they have their babies. So looking at warm-blooded or cold-blooded is pretty simple, but looking at things like skin, we could be talking about feathers, we could talk about fur, we can also talk about exoskeletons. So if you grab your arm and give it a little squeeze, we're kind of squishy on the outside and hard on the inside. If something has an exoskeleton, it's hard on the outside instead, so it's kind of like backwards for us. And then you're also looking at how they have their babies. Maybe they can lay eggs, or maybe they have live babies. So these 6 categories are up on our wall. So starting with cold-blooded, has scales and have eggs and live babies, we're looking at a reptile. So that could be something like a snapping turtle. Next we have cold-blooded again, but this time with smooth skin and has eggs. So that's going to be talking about an amphibian. So that's something like a frog. We still have cold-blooded animals here, but this time they have scales and they still lay eggs. So that's going to be looking at things like fish from our pond. So we have one more animal that is cold-blooded, but this time it has the exoskeleton like we were talking about, and it still is going to lay eggs. So that could be something like a giant water bug from our pond, or lots of other insects we might see out there. And then our last 2 categories are warm-blooded. One has fur and has live babies, so that's going to be our mammals. And our beaver is a good example of a mammal. And then the other category is warm-blooded but has feathers and lays eggs, and that would be a bird like a duck. Another way that we can classify animals is looking at how they change as they grow. So we have 3 different kind of ways we look at that. So first we have insect metamorphosis, which we call incomplete metamorphosis. So that's going to have 3 stages, and a good example of this would be a dragonfly. So it starts off as an egg, and then it becomes a nymph, and we never have that cocoon phase that we think about before it becomes an adult. But in all 3 of these phases, it looks a little bit different. Then we also have something called complete metamorphosis, which is something we can think about when we think about a butterfly. So when we think about metamorphosis, we're thinking about big changes. So when we think about a butterfly, it's going to start off as an egg. Then our egg is going to go into this stage, where it's kind of in what we call a cocoon in the larvae. And then we're going to have a beautiful caterpillar. And a caterpillar is going to go around, it's going to eat a whole bunch of things, and then it's going to know that it's time to go into the pupa stage. And it's going to stay in there for a little bit and undergo big changes, and it's going to come out again looking completely different. And that is when it comes out looking like a butterfly. So that's the 4 stages of complete metamorphosis. That's our butterfly. And then we have some animals that have no metamorphosis. So you're thinking of something like a bird. When the bird's born, it's going to look fairly similar to what it's going to look like when it's a full-grown adult. So we're going to have the egg, then the chick, then a juvenile, like a teenage bird, and then we have a full-size adult bird bird, and it looks a little bit similar throughout all of those 4 periods in its changes. And that's the kind of idea of metamorphosis, is how they look as they're changing and how much they're changing. At the pond, we might see some frogs, so we're going to talk a little bit about the frog life cycle. Frogs start off as eggs before they become a tadpole. Once it's a tadpole, it's going to develop its back legs first, then its front legs before becoming a frog.
Adaptations are another really important part to being able to tell animals apart. We have our red-eared sliders here, which are a domestic turtle. They are not meant to be living in the wild. In fact, they are an invasive species. So you need to make sure that you can't just let turtles off into the wild whenever you don't want to have them as pets anymore. So when we look at a turtle, we can look at what is special to that turtle in order to help it survive in the wild. So for a turtle, the main special piece to a turtle is its shell. So when we look at a turtle shell, we can tell whether they're an animal that is prey or is a predator. A snapping turtle has a really big back shell, but a very small undershell. And that means that they don't use their shell to hide. They just use their shell for protection, and they will attack another animal. Now, the red-eared sliders have a very big back shell and a very big undershell. So that means that they use their shell to hide, and they can pull their whole body into that shell to stay protected. Another special adaptation of a turtle is their webbed feet to help push them through the water so that they can swim really fast.
All right, we're gonna head into the forest now, and when we do that, we need to remember that we are the visitors. We need to make sure that we are being very careful in nature. There's lots of living things, and we don't want to harm any of the living things, like animals or plants. So, we're not gonna pick things, we're gonna leave things where they are. We're just gonna look with our eyes and make sure you keep your eyes wide open because there might be lots of things to see. We're going to leave only footprints and take only memories. Let's So now that we're at the pond, there are some things we need to remember. You don't want to go near any bodies of water without an adult. So because we're here, there's adults around, it's safe to go pond dipping. So when you're at the pond, you need a net. We use a net instead of our hands because we have oils, bug spray, even sunscreen on our hands, and it's not good for the bugs because it can interfere with them breathing. When you're at the pond, you use a net to dip. And there's lots of tiny little bugs, so you have to look very closely to see if anything's moving. If you see a frog, you want to borrow a friend's net to catch the frog so that you don't have to use your hand. You always want to keep 2 feet on the land at all times so that you don't fall into the pond.
Alright, hi everybody and welcome to our beaver pond here at Highlands Nordic. Our beavers have built this pond over a number of years for us. And if you look right behind me, and I'm going to show you, there's what looks like a giant pile of sticks. That pile of sticks is actually our beavers' lodge. Now beavers and humans are 2 of the creatures that live on our planet that create their own environment. They change the environment to make it the way they want. So beavers will dam up moving water, and then they will live inside that pond that they've created. The entrance to their lodge is actually underwater, and they'll swim under, climb up into like a mudroom area, shake all the water off, and climb even further up as to where they're actually going to be living. So what I thought we would do, we'll spend a few minutes here. Let's go dipping and see if we can find some other little critters living in the water.
all the bugs in there.
All right, everybody, welcome back to our beaver pond one more time. We're going to do a little dipping for critters, but there's actually a second beaver lodge right behind me here. I don't know if you can see it, but again, it just looks like a big pile of sticks. So we picked this corner of the pond because the creatures we're going to be looking for are going to be pretty small. And if I'm a small little creature, I want a good place to hide. And if I can hide in amongst these tall grasses and things, that's a great place for me to live. Now we're going to be using a high-tech pond sampling device called the Pond Scooper 3000. And the Pond Scooper 3000, when you're using it, you need to be a bit of a detective. So what you're going to do is you're going to scoop through the water, and you want to make a big, long pass. And then you're going to look really carefully. Now, the creatures we're going to be looking at, I'm going to let you know a secret. The creatures we're going to look at are going to look different than you and I are. I'm going to tell you that right now. And because they look different doesn't mean they're bad or icky or anything else. It just means they're different. So because these creatures live in the water, it pretty much means they need to be in the water to breathe. So if we do find some creatures, we want to put them right back into the water so that they can breathe and continue to live and do all the things they need to be able to do. Come on this way, let's see what we can find. Carefully, just step in here just a little bit, just so that I can get to the water, and give myself a nice big scoop, and then let's see what we can find. So come on over here. So I'm just going to carefully move some of this stuff back. Oh, there we go. Just making sure we don't lose anything. There we go. I don't know if you can see that in there. Can you see we got a little creature? Anybody know what that is? Anybody know what this one might be? Any ideas? You're right. That's it. Exactly. That's a tadpole. So we'll let him go in the water and they're going to swim around. And just like we talked about earlier, tadpoles are baby frogs or toads. And depending on, oh, there's a good one. So what I have something interesting here. I don't know if you might not be able to make it out, but can you see it looks a bit like jelly on the end of my spoon? That's actually toads' eggs. So toads lay their eggs in big masses and clumps. Frogs lay their eggs in big long lines. And if you look really closely, you might see some little dots in there. Those are the little baby tadpoles. So we'll put these guys in the water for now. So I did a little dipping earlier just to make sure we could see some things. Let's see what we got here. So we have some cool things. So I set this guy aside. So you can see this fellow right here. Oh, he does have some little legs poking up. Oh, no, not quite. So we have a couple of different kinds of tadpoles. We saw the smaller tadpole before. This tadpole is probably 2 years old. So this is a green frog tadpole. They're the biggest frogs we have in our pond here. And what they do is they'll actually live 2 years. So they'll be born 1 year, they'll live as a tadpole. In their second year, they get a little bigger, they grow some legs, and eventually that tail disappears and they hop out of the water looking like a frog. And speaking of frogs, if we look right beside us here, we have a green frog right there. So this fella here will become that guy in the bucket. Isn't that kind of cool? And when they hop out of the water, they look exactly like they're fully formed adult when they come up out of the water. Now I have something else interesting here. So I have this thing here. And this looks just a little bit like a pile of grass and twigs and things. But again, it's actually a home for an insect. So this is a home for an animal called a caddisfly. And it's actually a caddisfly larva. And larva is a funny word for one stage in their life. Now what the caddisfly will do is they make these, they hide inside there, and when littler creatures than them come by, they stick their head out, they grab them, they munch on them, they pull themselves back in, and then they will actually drag this house around with them wherever they happen to go. In here we also have a little fella here, and can you count the number of fingers on his tail? Can you see the number of fingers on his tail? How many fingers are there? That's right, there's 3. Did you count that? 1, 2, 3. Now this is actually a mayfly. You can always tell it's a mayfly because they have 3 tails, just like the word May. We spell the word May M-A-Y. How many letters? That's right, 3 letters, 3 tails. It's a mayfly. So that's how you can always tell those ones. We'll let these guys go back in here. What else do we have in here to look at? There is. There's a big leech in here if I can find it. There it is. So again, I got another creature here. So this critter here is one that people sometimes get a little worried about, but they're really nothing to worry about. This is a leech. And leeches will go through the water. They have a mouth with very sharp teeth on it, and they will come up against other creatures, hold their teeth against and rub them back and forth a bit like sandpaper, and they will try and get a little bit of a meal of blood, because they use the protein, which is something that's in the blood, to be able to make their babies and lay more eggs and make more leeches. But other than that, they just kind of float around in the pond. They don't really hurt anything. And even if it gets stuck on you, it doesn't really hurt. It's just kind of icky. But it doesn't really hurt. One of the interesting things about leeches is they used to use them in medicine, because in fact, they still use them in medicine to clean up wounds, because leeches will grab on, they'll take away all the bad stuff around a wound, and they'll help the wound heal a little bit quicker. So in some cases, doctors will actually still use them, but they're special ones. They're not just ones out of the pond. What else do we got? So inside here we have another tadpole. And, oh, come on now. And we have a little beetle. I don't know if you can see that beetle in there, this guy here, but that's a diving beetle. And they're actually kind of cool because they're kind of scuba divers. And what they do is they come up to the surface because they need to breathe air. They can't get the air from the water. So they'll come up, they'll put their bum up to the surface, they'll trap a bubble of air, and they'll pull it along behind them and use that as air to be underwater with. Anyway, lots of interesting little creatures and critters and things in here. We're gonna carefully let all these guys go, and then I think we're gonna go visit our farm straight away.
Welcome to the farm. This is Pumbaa. He is our potbelly miniature pig. He normally is at Highlands in the summertime, but we're keeping him at his summer vacation home for this summer. Pigs are very interesting creatures. So if we look at what they have on their skin, pigs have hair. Now it's not the kind of soft hair that we have. It's a little bit coarser, so a little bit rougher, kind of almost like what you would feel on a paintbrush. Okay. Pigs, they have a very strong snout. So the snout, their nose, is actually the strongest muscle in a pig's body. And they use that nose to root up the ground to find all kinds of delicious treats. So pigs will eat both plants and meat. So the things that they like to find in the ground are, they've got the grass, obviously, but they also love those juicy grubs and worms as well. Pigs, they have very sensitive skin, and a lot of the time people imagine pigs as being dirty animals. They're very smart and very clean, actually. Pigs, they naturally like to go to the washroom in the same spot every time, so they'll choose a spot and that's where they will go. And the idea that pigs like to roll in mud because they like to be dirty, they actually do that because they have very sensitive skin. So they can get sunburnt, which means that they're rolling in that mud. It's like putting on a layer of sunscreen. So this is our friend Pumbaa. He is about 8 years old. He is a male, and yes, a female is called a sow, and a male is called a boar. So right now we have our chickens on free range, which means that they are free to roam in this area. So they love to look through the grass and find all different kinds of bugs and grubs. They have a pointed beak, which means that they like to peck at the ground. When you see a pointed beak, that's an animal that will eat meat. So our chickens here, we've got our hens, which means that they are females, and a rooster is a male. And so a hen is the one that lays eggs. And so we have a couple different types. We've got some black chickens, we've got some white chickens, and we have some brown chickens. And it doesn't matter what color their feathers are, it doesn't matter what kinds of things they eat. What color of egg they will lay will depend on the type of chicken. So all of these chickens that we have here are going to lay brown eggs. There's lots of different colors of eggs that you might have seen before. There's white eggs. You might have seen some blue eggs before, maybe a little bit of brown with speckles. So there's a couple different types of eggs, but it all tastes the same on the inside. On the top of the head, they've got the comb, and on the underneath they have is called the wattle. We have here Sugar and Spice. They are pygmy miniature goats. Both of them are males. Now goats have a very interesting history. They are actually the first animal to be domesticated. So they were the first animal that humans saw that they were like, we could make this animal do good work for us. So they were the first animals to be domesticated, and they have a very low sense of gravity. So that means that they have really good balance where they love to jump up onto things. And they can be on very steep terrain without falling over. We had talked about earlier how important it is for animals to have food, water, space, and shelter. So you can see here that we've got a good sense of space for the goats. So they have lots of space to run around, play with each other. They have their shelter here. Goats are protective animals, so we don't need to lock them in at night because they will protect themselves from wild animals. But we do have this really great sturdy fence built up so that they will stay inside, because goats are they know how to escape quite easily. So you have to build a really good fence to keep them in properly. This is Teal. She's an important part to our farm here. So, welcome to another part of the farm. We've got a little lamb here, and we've got Farmer Gary here to help answer some questions about sheep. So, can you tell us a little bit about the breed of this sheep and how old she is?
So this is a purebred Old Dorset, and he's a month old. He happens to be kind of unique because he's half Australian.
There you go. So this little guy is currently still feeding milk off of his mom. You'll see here that he's got tags on its ears. It's pretty easy to tell who he is when it's just him here on his own. But when you're in a farm with hundreds, sometimes thousands of sheep, he's quite chatty. It's really hard to tell them apart. And so that's the reason we've got these tags in here, so that we can tell who its mom is, who its dad is, and what kind of medications and shots it's taken.
So the unique thing about these tags is this yellow tag, actually you can scan. It's a radio tag. So you can scan it. I have a program, the scanner connects to my cell phone, and it already brings up all the information on that lamb on my phone.
Bringing farming into the 21st century. Very cool. Well, thanks, Farmer Gary, for letting us borrow a sheep.
You're quite welcome.
And we'll look forward to seeing you again. She is a black lab who loves to spend time in the water. She also likes to hunt and collects the ducks and the geese. Now, when you are visiting a dog, you need to make sure that you ask the owner's permission before you pet a dog, because you don't know what that dog's like. Maybe it's different with young kids, maybe it's different with adults. You don't know how it's going to react, so always double check with the adult and owner if it's okay to pet that dog.
All right, thanks for visiting Highlands for our virtual field trip. Stay safe out there, and we hope to see you soon. We're going to end with a little Highlands